from Copenhagen. My name is Chris Burns. Probably most of you don't know that I had a talk show on Euronews, the news channel, for 5 years. It was 3 people, 10 minutes, start a lively discussion, sometimes a fight. And we're going to do this for a half an hour with our first panel, and then we'll have a second panel after this. These are the lunchtime discussions, debates, if you like, that we're going to be doing with the audience here, as well as those of you around the world. If you have something to say or a question to pose, it is hashtag ITUC18, as we're here at the Congress of the ITUC. A lot of very important issues, a lot of impassioned speeches this morning, and some of the speakers from this morning are and will be up here on the panel. There will be 4 of us all together eventually. And let's first talk about some of the issues. The name of this panel for the next half hour is Unions on the Front Line, the triple threats of inequality, climate change, and the decline of democracy. Is it the perfect storm? Now, I'd like to pile up a bunch of these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. This is one of them. Perhaps the most important one is reduced inequalities, right? Between now and 2030, we got to do this. We got to do this. Guys, you got to put your headsets on. Can you wire up these guys with their headsets, please? Nicholas. You don't have the headsets? For this you can. Otherwise, you can pass the mic around, all right? Okay, so this is one of the main inequalities. One of the main issues we've got to deal with is reduced inequalities. It is a triple threat. It is a perfect storm of inequality, climate change, and decline of democracy. How are we going to deal with this? And today we heard impassioned speeches about that from some people, including Omar from Somalia, where it is dangerous to be doing what he's doing. And he's a very brave guy. We're all very brave, actually, to be doing this. All right, I won't waste any more time on this. Sally McManus, let's start with you, Secretary of the ACTU from Australia. And you, ABC, the television channel, wouldn't let you in to talk to the union members. There's one example of not being able to do your job, and you've got to be able to do it and talk to your union members. They locked you. The TV channel locked you out.
They backed down.
They finally backed down.
They
okay,
did.
all right. But anyway, let's talk about this perfect storm of inequality, climate change, and decline of democracy. Where do the unions fit in, and how can they deal with this perfect storm? Sally.
Well, we've got a huge problem across the world, of course, with rising inequality, and that's because for the last 30 years we've been following this idea of neoliberalism. Some people call it trickle-down economics. We saw it start in the English-speaking world in the UK with Margaret Thatcher, and then in the US with Ronald Reagan and various other ways around the world.
And in Australia as well, correct?
And in Australia, absolutely. And so they promised us that trickle-down economics would mean that everyone would do well out of it, that we'd have better services, that if we privatise things would be cheaper, we've had more choice. And after 30 years, that experiment is really, at its end. And we see what the answer is. The answer is record inequality. That's what we've got. And so now, of course, we've got a handful of people who have more wealth than, more than half the world, more than 70% of the world, actually. And the role of workers is to stand up to that, to turn it around, to demand rules for fairness, to demand rules that fairly distribute the wealth. And the way you do that is make sure that working people in countries all around the world have the tools they need in order to win fair pay rises or in order to win their fair share of the wealth they're creating.
That's some of the themes here is building workers' power, changing the rules. Why don't we move on to Luca Vicentini. General Luca, do you have a headphone?
Does it work? Yes.
Is it working?
Is it okay?
You have them wired up?
Yeah.
Okay. Luca, you were at a macroeconomic dialogue at the European Council recently, where you said the EU, the European Union, needs to prioritize policies to boost public and private investment in the real economy, especially in quality job creation and digitalization. How much is that a factor in dealing with these inequalities?
Well, it's a very powerful factor. We are facing an incredible emergency in Europe that we were not expecting until, I will say, a couple of years ago. And it's an emergency for democracy. We had recent elections in several European countries, and we will have European elections in 6 months' time. And what we have seen is that 1/3 of trade union members, not even workers, 1/3 of trade union members voted for xenophobic far-right parties, anti-European, anti-democratic forces. What does it mean? Does it mean that workers became, and members of the unions became suddenly fascist or xenophobic? No, this is not the truth.
Yeah, in your opinion, why did they pitch back to the far right? Why did they do that?
Exactly, this is the point. Why did vote for these far-right forces? The reason is inequality. The reason is unemployment,
inequality,
social exclusion, very poor jobs with very poor salaries, not access to social protection, to housing, etc., etc.
Right.
Not having a perspective for the future. That's why we say, as the European Trade Union Confederation, we need to change the policy. We need to change the model. No more neoliberal policy, but a sustainable and progressive economic growth that is based on social equality and on workers' rights.
You said that the triangle in which the European social model was based, social protection, collective bargaining, and social dialogue, was dismantled during the financial crisis of 2008.
In the last decade, we had a disaster in this respect. It was all destroyed, and we have now to rebuild it up. And the only way to do it is to invest on equality, invest on job creation, quality job creation, and reestablishing our collective bargaining power. Collective bargaining power is the first tool in the hands of the trade unions to make a difference, in terms of workers' rights and working conditions.
Hashtag ITUC 2018. If there are any questions or statements, please let us know. For all of those you out there watching this streaming, and those of you in the audience, please let us know. Omar Farouk Osman, Secretary General of Festus, Somalia. I've been there. I know how dangerous it is. And you're dealing with a climate of fear, of intimidation, of impunity. I've seen that. How do trade unions deal with that on the ground?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yes, of course, when it comes to the issue of very precarious and very dangerous working environment, is the first issue.
Good. Go ahead.
Is the first issue for the trade unions to address it, because the occupational safety and health is a priority for the unionists. The well-being of the workers is a very serious issue. For our unionists, what we do was mainly to tackle the violence and the impunity. We were working in an environment where there is a breakdown of the rule of law, where the judiciary doesn't work, where there is no police or there is no law enforcement. But what we have been demanding is that we were challenging warlords and criminal, unscrupulous business people who were profiting from the conflict and the civil war. And we were naming them, we were shaming them, we were exposing them through the media and through the public.
And through the ILO as well, which came out with a ruling on that.
Of course, right? We took them to the ILO,
yeah.
We took them to the European Parliament, we took to the African Union Commission on Human and People's Rights. What we did was because they care about their image outside the country. No matter what they do, the impunity and the crimes that they commit inside the country. So that kind of advocacy was very important. But more important also is that to show them, our militants, our persistence, that we are not giving up. We are going to fight. No matter how much they, shed our blood, or no matter how difficult they make our life. That's why we have to be militant, we have to persist, and we tell them, look, no, we are not going anywhere. And we are going to fight up to the last ounce of our blood for our rights, for peace. And that is the only way that people can restore democracy and social justice in our communities. Chris, to take you back, because you have been to Somalia, you have been to Mogadishu.
Yeah.
The collapse of the military government in 1991 in Somalia was caused by lack of social justice. Because of that, people stood up, took AK-47, or even without AK-47, and toppled the most powerful military man in Africa, not in Eastern Africa, the most powerful military man in Africa, Siad Barre.
Siad Barre. Let's move on. We'll come back to that. Tefere Gebre? Gebre. Tefere Gebre. You have an amazing story as Executive Vice President of the AFL-CIO USA. 30 years, you came as a 15-year-old refugee from Ethiopia to the U.S., and 30 years later, you became executive vice president of the AFL-CIO. An amazing story. We did hear and talk about migration and refugees during the plenary, and you're an example of someone who is welcome to the U.S. That atmosphere has changed, at least among some Americans, and you are facing this triple witching hour of climate change, inequality, threat to democracy. How are you dealing with that in the U.S.?
Well, we're trying to deal with it, and I just want to mention that this didn't happen just overnight. A lot of people think that the U.S. is in a situation it is in because of Donald Trump's election.
No, it happened before that.
It has been
You had
for
the Tea
decades.
Partiers. You had other movements, right?
Even before the Tea Party movement, it started in the 80s under the Ronald Reagan administration. And a free market that is running rampant, a free market that doesn't include workers themselves. My story can be told only in the United States, and that is the beauty of the United States. I left my hometown in Ethiopia to be free, and the only place I wanted to be was the land of the free and the home of the brave in the United States. I am sorry to tell you that that place almost doesn't exist anymore. As we speak right now, our military, with our tax money, is throwing tear gas at children and at infants at the Mexico-U.S. border as they try to get asylum. So the workers in the United States are rising up, from the teachers who are striking to hotel workers, to everybody else. We're saying enough is enough. And in order for that to happen, we have to strengthen our democracy. So this is one point I just want to stress. For the trade union movement to think that we can succeed without actually restoring full democracy in our countries, that's going to be an impossible fight. So that's what we're fighting for, is to restore our democracy.
But these midterm elections were not the big so-called blue wave that some people had hoped for. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the results as far as the trade union movement?
Actually, on election night, we felt the same way that you just described it. But as votes started rolling in, as more and more results came in, actually, we did have a blue wave. But here's the thing.
In the House of Representatives,
in
but
the
not the Senate.
In the House of Representatives, look, having at least one pillar of government to actually respond and resist is a very important step to take. But we're not measuring our success one election at a time. If we want to be successful, we want to build a movement, and movements are not built one election at a time. Movements keep on moving. And we keenly understand that the difference between a campaign and a movement. Campaigns come and go, but movements keep on building, and what we're trying to build is a movement that keeps on moving until we achieve true equality.
So this was an important step then for you. Sally, let's come back to you. There's in this sort of dynamic about trying to fight climate change, dealing with inequality, and then the threat to democracy. What we're seeing different things happening in the world that raise the issue. We have the issue of just transition. To me, is kind of in the background of this yellow vest movement in France. Now it is, people see elements of the far right, but there are a lot of people who are just fed up with paying high prices, and they don't see a just transition. This is what the French government is trying to do. How do you deal with that? And also, we saw in Australia, we saw students taking to the streets, going on strike, pressuring for the government to do something about climate change. How do you do that just transition? How does the trade union movement push that through?
Well, two things. First of all, we have to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of very powerful people in the world that have got a big vested interest in there not being change, and so they want to hang on to their companies, their profits that are doing very well out of destroying our planet. So that's who we've got to fight in this struggle over the future of our world. Secondly, the issue of just transition is really important, because if workers are not looked after and they're not supported and their communities aren't supported, when there's change, because there needs to be, and we move towards renewables, well, you'll have a whole lot of people left behind. And those people who are left behind will start saying, well, hang on a minute, is this again, are the rules all stacked in favour of those powerful people, and we are not considered, and we are just left to our own devices, and we're meant to just survive by ourselves? That's why they're going to start, voting for the far right, because they're opportunistically, those billionaires are opportunistically getting up and saying they care about them when they don't care about them. And so we need to be filling that vacuum. We need to be filling that vacuum, and we need to be giving people hope, and we need to be giving people real solutions that put working people at the centre of any change.
Is anybody out in the audience here would like to pose a question, make a statement? Nobody? Okay, let's move on. Perhaps we were also watching the web to see if anybody comes in on hashtag ITUC18. Omar, the issue of climate change, there's this issue of climate migrants. And there could be a lot of people leaving your region because of climate change. How does, in your opinion, does the global trade union movement, and you depend on that movement to accomplish what you've done in Somalia, how can the global trade union movement become effective in bringing about a just transition to stop climate change?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important priority for all of us, that this notion of climate change is not somehow strategically important in Africa or in the Horn of Africa or in Eastern Africa.
But it is.
It's not true.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah.
It's something that we have to fight on. And that is what, in my union, for example, what we do is this. We are fighting the environmental degradation, because they are cutting the trees, and they are making it charcoals, and they are exporting to Dubai, to the Middle East, and they are taking it out. We are fighting also on that one front. The other thing that we are also doing was the issue of toxic dumping. Toxic dumping, because Somalia has the longest coast in Africa. And there is a toxic dump because of the lawlessness. Ships are coming from other places and dumping toxic things, and this is affecting the health of the newly born children, and that is a problem for all of us. So this issue of changing of the climate change has also caused this recurrent droughts that is massively devastating the Horn of Africa region, where you see that the drought is there are always, this tsunami that is happening. So this is a problem for all of us. The unionists have to address it. It's affecting the workers and their families and our own communities. Politicians may find it convenient to avoid it, but it is something that the unions have to campaign on, and we have to tackle it. And we are part of the global labor movement that is seeing that we need justice, the fight for climate change.
Okay. Any questions out there? Not at the moment. Luca, you've also said that we need to tackle inequality. SDG number 10, we need to close the wage gap within and between member states of the European Union.
Yeah.
How are you going to pull that off? How are you going to change the rules to do that? One of the themes of this Congress.
Well, is what I said before. For us in Europe, the only way to change the rules and to fill the wage gap is to increase our collective bargaining power. We have two Europes in Europe, unfortunately. There is the traditional old Europe, where collective bargaining structures were always very strong. There were tries, to destroy all this, but we managed to defend them. But then we have Eastern Europe, where there is no collective bargaining at all. When the transition between the communist planned economy to the capitalistic economy happened 25 years ago, well, this transition was managed by imposing the neoliberal American model, instead of spreading to the East the socially sustainable social market economy model that we had in Europe before. And this is now the major challenge for us, how to make sure that we can build up collective bargaining power in these countries, to have collective bargaining in the branches, in the sectors, covering all workers and improving their wages and working conditions. But let me say, you wrote an example, to the discussion, that is the yellow jackets in France.
Yeah.
Well, these people are not for just transition. These people are not for transition at all. These people are close to Marine Le Pen model.
But I wouldn't say all of them are.
Well, most of them.
Okay.
Most of them because they want simply to continue using their cars.
Yeah.
Stop. There is nothing linked, to just transition. There are other people that are, let's say, affected by transition, that are the miners, there are the steel workers, but they are also guys affected by other kind of transitions, the digitalization transition,
Yes.
automation transition, globalization transition.
Right.
So we need to build up a comprehensive model for just transitions, plural, because we have different phenomena happening, now in the labor market in Europe and outside Europe, and we need as trade unions to be there and to manage the phenomena in the interest of workers.
Okay, let's stay on that just transition. Let's stay on cars. Tefere, GM, General Motors, is about to lay off, plans to lay off 14,000 employees, supposedly because they want to transition over to cleaner cars, self-driving cars, among other things, SUVs too, but let's not talk about that. But the idea that this is flying in the face of any kind of just transition, isn't it? How does the trade union movement fight that?
Well, we have been fighting it, and everything is interlinked. And this is a result of still, to this day, the model of a discredited trade agreement models that we have been dealing with. And when workers have been suffering through neoliberal trade models for years that never took an account to their lives, then you open a space for demagogues like Donald Trump to actually jump into that space. So what's happening at GM is proving to workers who actually got fooled by Donald Trump that the deliverables are not there when you're counting on them. We're suspicious about GM. We don't think it's about just transition. It is about actually another plot to ship out jobs and to send jobs into where they could find cheaper labor. That's why organizations like the ITUC are key, because we have to fight for workers anywhere, everywhere, wherever GM wants to take this job to. We have to be at the table on climate change. That's why I'm so proud of the leadership that Sharon has been having by making the labor movement as a key player.
Sharon Burrow, head of the ITUC.
As a key player on negotiations on the environment. Of course, my proud country has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. That's why electing a new Congress is really very important, because we will demand from the new Congress to put the U.S. back at the table on the climate change issue.
Okay, hashtag ITUC18. Let's tweet that out, guys. Any questions among the audience statements? We got 6 minutes left for this first panel. It's just not enough time. But I usually did shows in 10 minutes, so we can do it. We can say a lot in 6 minutes. Yeah, please. Oh, hang on. Microphone. Keep it brief. Who's name, rank, serial number, please?
Sure. I'm Celeste Drake. I'm with the AFL-CIO from the United States. And you talked briefly about these voters who were maybe addressing inequality, and they seem to vote for populists, but did they all sort of turn nationalist and racist overnight? Can you talk a little bit more about that and why unions are part of the answer in hopefully turning workers away from such votes?
Okay. Sally, go ahead and take it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Well, the thing is that these opportunistic demagogues are providing answers to people. They're filling a vacuum of, why is it that my living standards are now worse than what my parents were? Why are things going backwards for a whole lot of people in the developed world? Why are our living standards, why is inequality getting worse? Well, they're blaming, of course, people, next door, the migrant, the refugee, all of those things. They're providing an answer and they're providing a framework for understanding it. We've got to provide people with an alternative framework, and it's the truth. like the actual truth. The reason why we've got a problem with inequality is we've got the people at the top are not sharing the wealth, and we don't have enough power to be able to demand that they do, and we need to change the rules in order to achieve that. So the reason why people are losing their jobs, the reason why they're being offshored, the reason why all these things are happening is not because of the migrant or the refugee, it's because the rules are written for the billionaires of this world, and that's the truth.
Is there a different way to communicate this, or to reach out in a different way? I mean, obviously, it's not working
Well,
so
number
far.
one, we need to be in all of those communities, and that's not just about being on TV. That's actually about being with people on the ground in those communities, developing leaders in those communities, doing the popular education that's needed, so that people have the truthful way of seeing and understanding what's happening to them in their communities.
Okay, we have like just a few minutes left. Katowice.
May I just
Go
a
ahead.
second reply
Please.
to
Luca.
Celeste, because this is a very crucial point.
Yeah.
There are, at least in Europe, I can talk about Europe, there are two progressive rhetorics that completely failed in addressing the problem. The first progressive rhetoric is the one that defends democracy, formally speaking, the democratic values, and trying to teach to workers, you did the wrong choice, going to the far right because we have to defend democracy. They don't give... Sorry, they simply don't give any value to this kind of rhetoric. And the other fake rhetoric that sometimes came also from the unions was to say, we need to defend social Europe. Fine, what does it mean, social Europe? You need to provide replies, concrete response to these demands. You need to provide facts to people, the people we represent. We need to make sure that they can get a decent job, a decent salary, decent social protection, rights in the workplace, housing, etc., etc. They need to feel comfortable. They need to feel they have a future, and the trade unions can build it up. This is the point. We have to change the rhetoric in this sense, in my opinion.
Okay, we just have a little bit of time left, and I'd like to get some of your input. Yes, but Stefan, quick, please.
As trade unionists, we have to demand, when we talk about democracy, democracy has to start at the workplace. Democracy doesn't come from the ballot box into the workplace. It has to start at the workplace. In the United States, we're down to about 11% of workers who have a collective bargaining right. So you can't call it a collective bargaining right, but the other way of looking at it is almost 90% of workers in the United States don't get to actually exercise their rights as human beings to have the freedom to choose a union at the workplace. We have to demand that democracy start at the workplace.
Okay, Katowice, let's make some news, because it's going to happen. It's happening.
Yeah.
And Katowice, how do trade unions fit into Katowice? What is your message in Katowice on a just transition to fight climate change?
Well, I think we need to hold our governments to account. We need to build a strong movement within, maybe in Africa or beyond all continents, on how do we address this issue of just transition. It is not something that we can all avoid. It is something that is all affecting us. So we need to be proactive and to be demanding. We should not only wait when governments change their mind or play politics in it. We should be proactive as unionists. We should be demanding, and we should have a checklist of what they have to deliver. That is the force that the unions should be putting on our governments.
Sally, you've got 1 minute. Last word.
I agree with that. We can have a global checklist, a demand for all of our governments in terms of what rules we want changed and what justice we want for working people. And clearly it involves collective bargaining rights. Clearly it involves supporting unions, because we are the force against inequality, and that needs to happen. And clearly it involves a just transition.